A woman was already freezing to death on a wooden bench when the millionaire cowboy first saw her through the snow. The winter of 1889 did not knock politely on Wyoming's door. It came screaming across the plains, tearing at roofs, swallowing tracks, and turning the town of Cheyenne into a place where even breath felt fragile. Wind drove needles of ice through the darkness, and the old train station stood nearly abandoned, its walls thin and unheated, its lamps flickering as if unsure they should stay lit at all. On one of the benches, pulled close to the wall for what little shelter it offered, sat Clara Evelyn Hart. She had stopped feeling her fingers some time ago. Her hands rested in her lap, stiff and pale, wrapped loosely around a small leather bag that had once been polished and proud, and was now worn thin at the seams. Each breath she took rose in a faint white cloud and vanished almost instantly, stolen by the cold. Inside that bag was everything she owned in the world. A few simple medical tools, several folded certificates, creased from being handled too often, a faded photograph of people who no longer spoke her name, and $5, counted and recounted until the numbers meant nothing anymore. The last eastbound train had left hours earlier. The clerk had shaken his head when Clara asked about rooms, his voice apologetic but firm. No credit. No charity tonight. The storm was bad, he said. Dangerous to be out. She had nodded, thanked him, and walked back to the station without argument, because argument cost energy, and energy was something she no longer had to spare. Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did little good. Her clothes were clean but thin, meant for hospital corridors and city streets, not for a Wyoming blizzard that showed no mercy to the unprepared. Her boots were damp from the snow, and each minute they stayed that way. The cold climbed higher, creeping from her toes toward her knees, her hips, her chest. She knew the signs. She had been trained to recognize them in others. The numbness, the trembling that came and went, the strange heaviness behind the eyes, as if sleep were trying to claim her at the worst possible moment. Clara forced herself to stay upright. People who lay down in the cold, she knew, often did not get back up. It was a bitter irony that she understood all this so well. Back in Philadelphia, she had been the one warming hands, adjusting blankets, whispering reassurance to patients who feared they might not make it through the night. She had worked long hours in charity wards, learned to tend wounds that never seemed to stop bleeding, delivered babies in rooms that smelled of disinfectant and hope. She had been good at it, respected once, until the night Dr. Edwin Crowley decided that her refusal did not matter. Clara's jaw tightened at the memory, even now. She could still feel the panic, the rage, the instinct that had taken over when his hands reached where they did not belong. She had grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a bedpan, heavy and cold, and swung with all the strength she had. The sound of bone breaking had been unmistakable. What followed had been quieter, but far more destructive. Crowley's reputation had outweighed her word. The hospital dismissed her within days. Letters went unanswered. Interviews ended abruptly the moment her name was recognized. The medical community closed ranks, and Clara Hart found herself locked out of the life she had built with her own hands. So she went west. Out there, she had been told, people cared more about what you could do than who whispered against you. Mining towns, ranches, places where a trained nurse was still a rarity. She sold what she could, bought a ticket, and told herself that starting over was better than standing still. Now she sat alone, listening to the wind scream through the cracks in the station walls, wondering if she had been wrong, Her thoughts began to drift, slow and heavy, and that frightened her enough to straighten her spine and clench her jaw. She pressed the leather bag closer to her body, as if it could somehow share its warmth with her. That was when she heard the sound. At first, she thought it was only the wind changing its tone, but then it came again. Distinct, rhythmic, unmistakable. Horse hooves. Clara lifted her head, squinting into the swirling white beyond the station doors. Through the curtain of snow, a dark shape moved closer, solid and purposeful. A horse emerged first, tall and broad-chested, its coat dusted with ice. Then the rider dismounted, moving with the ease of someone long accustomed to bad weather and long roads. He tied the reins with practiced hands and pushed open the station door, bringing a rush of snow and cold with him. The man was large, wrapped in a heavy coat, his hat pulled low. His boots were well made, the leather thick and cared for. He looked around the empty station. Then his gaze settled on Clara. He stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside there was only the sound of Clara's uneven breathing. "Evening, miss," the man said at last, his voice calm and steady, touched with the faint drawl of someone who had spent years under open skies. "That's no place to be sitting on a night like this." Clara tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard. She managed a small shake of her head instead. He stepped closer, his expression shifting as he took in the color of her lips, the stiffness of her posture, the way her hands clutched the bag as if letting go might mean losing consciousness altogether. "My name's Samuel Whitaker," he said, removing his gloves. "I own a ranch north of here. Was heading home when I saw you through the window." His eyes flicked to the leather bag at her feet. "You a doctor?" "Nurse," Clara managed, the words scraping out of her throat. "Trained." Something changed in his face at that. Surprise and something like relief. "You're going to freeze if you stay here," Sam said, not unkindly, but with quiet certainty. "This station isn't heated, and the storm's getting worse." "I don't have money for a room," Clara whispered. "That's not the problem we're solving right now," he replied. "Getting you warm is." He shrugged out of his coat and draped it around her shoulders. The weight of it, still holding his body heat, made her gasp softly. Leather, wool, the faint scent of clean soap and cold air. It was the first real warmth she had felt in hours. "Can you walk?" he asked. Clara tried. Her legs refused. Without hesitation, Sam bent and lifted her, the leather bag tucked securely against her side. She was lighter than she should have been, he realized, and trembling badly. "The hotel's just across the street," he said, adjusting his grip. "We'll get you inside, get you warm and fed. You can tell me the rest when you're ready." As he carried her back into the storm, Clara pressed her face against his coat, her vision blurring. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt something loosen in her chest. It was not love. Not yet. It was safety. And in the land beyond the howling wind, that was everything. The warmth came back slowly, and with it the pain. Clara became aware of it in small waves at first. A sharp tingling in her fingers, a dull ache in her toes, then a deeper, spreading burn that made her draw a shallow breath and close her eyes. She had told patients many times that feeling returning was a good sign, but knowing something and living through it were not the same thing. She was no longer on the bench. The air around her was warm and still, carrying the scent of burning wood and clean linen. When she opened her eyes, she saw firelight dancing across polished furniture and a high ceiling. A thick blanket rested over her shoulders, and another covered her legs. Somewhere nearby, a log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks briefly upward. She was in a hotel room, a fine one. Clara's first instinct was panic. She tried to sit up too quickly, and the room tilted. Before she could fall forward, a steady hand appeared at her elbow, firm but gentle. "Easy," Samuel Whitaker said quietly. "You're safe. Just sit for a moment." She looked up at him, her thoughts sluggish but sharpening. He stood a short distance away. No coat now. His sleeves rolled back slightly as he fed another log into the fire. He did not crowd her. He did not touch her again once she was steady. "The hotel clerk sent for the doctor," he went on, still not looking directly at her. "He'll come by if the roads stay clear. In the meantime, you're warming up the right way." Clara swallowed. "You didn't rub my hands," she said slowly, the professional part of her mind taking over despite everything. Sam glanced back at her and gave a faint, almost relieved smile. "I've seen men lose fingers that way. We'll let the heat do its work." A knock came at the door. Sam crossed the room and opened it just wide enough to accept a tray, then closed it again. He set it on a small table nearby and poured a cup of coffee, letting it cool for a moment before bringing it to her. "Drink this slowly," he said. "Just a little at a time." She obeyed, her hands still shaking but steadier now. The warmth spread through her chest, easing the tightness there. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she smelled the soup. "Thank you," she murmured. "You don't owe me anything," Sam replied, and there was no hesitation in his voice. Anyone would have done the same. Clara almost laughed at that, but she was too tired. Not anyone would have noticed. Not anyone would have stopped. She sipped in silence while the fire crackled. Her breathing evened out. The pain softened into something bearable. After a while, she became aware that Sam had turned his back to her again, giving her privacy as the hotel maid knocked softly and slipped in with a bundle of women's clothing. The maid laid the clothes neatly on the bed and left without a word. "When you're ready," Sam said, facing the window now, "I'll step out so you can change. Your clothes are damp." He did not wait for an answer. He opened the door and left, closing it gently behind him. Clara stared at the door for a long moment. That small act, so simple and so rare, loosened something inside her more than the fire ever could. She changed slowly, her fingers clumsy but functional again. The borrowed dress was plain but warm, the boots sturdy. When she was done, she sat back down by the fire, letting the heat finish its work. Sam returned a few minutes later, careful to knock first. "You're looking better," he said, relief evident now. "Color's coming back." "So it is," she replied softly. "You handled things properly." He shrugged. "Ranch life teaches you a few lessons, mostly about patience." They sat across from one another, the space between them respectful. The fire cast long shadows on the walls. "What brought you west, Miss Hart?" he asked at last. "If you don't mind telling me." Clara studied his face in the firelight. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his early 30s, his features marked by sun and wind rather than age. His eyes were steady. There was anger there, she sensed, but it was controlled, held in reserve. She told him the truth. Not every detail, not yet, but enough. She spoke of Philadelphia, of working long hours, of a man who would not take no for an answer, of a single moment of violence that had saved her body and destroyed her career. When she finished, the room was very quiet, Sam's jaw tightened. "You defended yourself," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "And they punished you for it?" "Yes." He leaned back slightly, his hands resting on his knees. "Out here," he said slowly, "we don't have much patience for men who use power that way, or for systems that protect them." Clara felt her throat tighten. "That hasn't been my experience." "It doesn't have to stay that way." She looked at him, startled. "I own a ranch," Sam continued. "About 28 miles north of here. 42,000 acres. Around 45 men year-round. More during the busy seasons. Injuries are part of the work. We've lost good people because help came too late." "You're offering me charity," Clara said carefully. "No," he replied just as carefully. "I'm offering you work." He laid it out plainly. Pay that matched her training. A private cabin, a medical room stocked with proper supplies, clear duties, clear boundaries. "I won't pretend I'm not glad to have found someone with your skills," he said, "but I need you to know this isn't an obligation. And whatever happens or doesn't happen, between us personally, your position would never depend on it." Clara listened, her heart pounding harder with each word. "I won't be trapped again," she said quietly. "You won't be," Sam replied. "Not on my ranch." Outside, the storm began to ease, the wind softening at last. Inside, Clara felt something else settle into place. It was not trust yet, but it was the beginning of it. Morning arrived quietly, as if the storm had exhausted itself during the night and now wished to leave without drawing attention. Pale sunlight filtered through the hotel window, resting gently on the floorboards and the edge of the bed. For a moment, Clara Evelyn Hart lay still, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a town waking up after a blizzard. Somewhere below, a door opened. Footsteps crossed packed snow. A distant voice laughed, thin but alive. She was warm, properly warm, the kind of warmth that reaches bone and stays there. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was and why. When she did, her hand moved instinctively to the small leather bag resting beside the bed. The strap was frayed, the surface scratched, but it was still there. So was everything inside it. That steadied her more than anything else. A soft knock came at the door. "Miss Hart," Samuel Whitaker's voice said from the hallway, "I thought you might be awake." "Come in," she replied, sitting up. He entered carrying a breakfast tray, simple but generous. Eggs, bread, preserved fruit, and a pot of coffee that steamed faintly in the cool morning air. He set it down by the window without comment, then stepped back. "I figured you'd need your strength today," he said. "No decisions have to be made yet. Just thought you should eat." Clara smiled faintly. "You're very careful not to tell me what to do." Sam returned the smile, just as faint. "You've had enough of that for one lifetime." She ate slowly, savoring each bite. Hunger, she realized, had become such a constant companion that she had stopped noticing it until it was gone. When she finished, she felt clearer, steadier, more herself than she had in weeks. "So," she said at last, setting the cup aside, "if I were to accept your offer, what would today look like?" Sam leaned against the window frame, considering. "We'd ride north. It's nearly 4 hours. Longer if the snow's deep in places. I'd show you the land, introduce you to the foreman, let you see the cabin and the medical room for yourself. After that, the decision would still be yours. And if I say no, then I'd make sure you had supplies, a proper coat, and a safe way to wherever you choose to go next. Clara studied him. He meant it. There was no urgency in his voice, no pressure hidden behind kindness. "I'll come," she said. "Not as a promise, just to see. That's all I'd ask." They left Cheyenne mid-morning. Sam had arranged everything quietly while she rested. A sturdy horse waited for her, along with a warm coat, gloves, and boots better suited for the terrain ahead. When she protested the expense, he waved it away. "Consider it an advance," he said lightly. "If you stay, we'll settle accounts later. If not, I'll sleep just fine knowing you're not freezing." The road north unfolded slowly, the land opening wider with each mile. Snow blanketed the ground in soft curves, broken only by the dark lines of fences and the occasional stand of trees. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, pale and forgiving after the violence of the night before. Sam pointed out landmarks as they rode: a creek that flooded in spring, a line of hills that blocked the worst of the winter winds. Clara listened, absorbing not just the geography, but the care with which he spoke of it. This was not land he merely owned. It was land he understood. As they crested a rise late in the afternoon, the ranch came into view. Buildings clustered in the valley below, practical and solid. Smoke curled from chimneys. Horses moved in the distance, dark shapes against the white. It was not grand in the way city estates were grand, but there was order here. Purpose. "That's it," Sam said quietly. "The Whitaker Ranch." They rode into the yard just as several men were finishing their work. Conversations paused. Curious glances followed them. Sam dismounted first, then offered his hand to Clara, steadying her as she came down. "This is Miss Clara Hart," he said simply. "She's a trained nurse." That was all it took. No questions about her past, no sideways looks, just nods, polite greetings, and a sense of cautious relief that did not go unnoticed. The foreman, a broad-shouldered man with weathered features, stepped forward. "Henry Cole," he said. "Glad to have you, miss. We've been needing someone with your skills." "I hope I can be of use," Clara replied, and meant it. Sam led her away from the bustle toward a small cabin set a short distance from the main house. Inside, a fire already burned. The rooms were modest but clean. A bed, a table, shelves waiting to be filled. Through the window, the land stretched out in quiet promise. Then he opened the final door. The medical room was better equipped than Clara had dared to hope. Cabinets stocked with supplies, clean instruments laid out with care, fresh linens folded neatly on a shelf. She stood very still. "You prepared all this," she said softly. "I hoped," Sam replied. For a long time. Something in her chest tightened, sharp and unexpected. After months of rejection, of doors closing before she could speak, this space felt unreal. Before she could say more, a knock sounded at the door. Henry Cole appeared, supporting a young man with a badly swollen foot. "Sorry to trouble you so soon," Henry said, but he took a bad step getting off his horse. Clara was already moving. "Let's take a look," she said, her voice calm, professional. She knelt, examined the injury, cleaned and bandaged it with practiced ease. When she finished, she glanced up to find Sam watching from the doorway, something like quiet wonder in his expression. That evening, as Clara sat alone in her cabin, exhaustion settled over her in a way that felt earned rather than desperate. 2 days ago, she had been waiting to die on a bench. Now she had a place, a purpose, and a choice. Outside, The wind moved gently through the trees, no longer a threat. For the first time in a long while, Clara allowed herself to believe that survival had not been the end of her story. It might have been the beginning. The accident did not announce itself with drama. It arrived the way most real disasters do, sudden, unplanned, and without regard for what people were ready for. Spring had begun to loosen winter's grip on the valley. Snow still lingered in the shadows, but the days were longer now, the air softer. Clara had been on the ranch for several weeks, long enough for routine to settle in. Cuts from barbed wire, sprained wrists, fevers that broke quietly in the night. Men who came to her cabin stiff and guarded and left lighter, grateful, sometimes embarrassed by how much relief they felt simply being listened to. She had earned their trust without asking for it. That afternoon, clouds rolled in faster than expected. A sudden crack of thunder sent horses spooking across the lower pasture. Shouts rose from the yard. Clara stepped out of her cabin just as a rider galloped toward her, his face pale beneath the dust. "Miss Hart," he called. "It's Lucas Reed. He's down." The words were enough. Clara did not ask questions as she gathered her bag. She ran toward the bunkhouse, skirts lifted, breath steady despite the pounding of her heart. Inside, the smell of sweat and fear hung thick in the air. Men stood back to make room as she pushed through. Lucas lay on a table they had cleared too quickly. He was young, barely more than a boy, his face slick with sweat, his breathing shallow and uneven. One look told Clara what the others were afraid to say aloud. This was bad. She knelt beside him, hands already moving, bruising across the chest, blood at the corner of his mouth. His pulse was fast, weak, internal injuries likely. Waiting for a doctor from town would take hours. Hours Lucas did not have. "Henry," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "I need hot water, clean sheets, and as much light as you can manage. Now." The men hesitated only a moment before obeying. Someone bolted for lamps, another ran for water. The room shifted around her, but Clara remained still, focused. "We should send for the doctor," one of them said, fear cracking his voice. "We already have," Henry replied, "but he's a long way out." Clara met his eyes. "Then we don't wait." The room went silent. "I've done this before," she continued, not raising her voice. "If we do nothing, he will die. If we act, he has a chance." It was not bravado, it was fact. Henry nodded once. "Tell us what you need." Time lost its shape after that. Clara worked by lamplight, her hands steady even as exhaustion pressed at the edges of her awareness. She gave instructions calmly, precisely. The men followed them, clumsy but determined. Sweat beaded at her hairline. Her back ached. Her arms burned. Somewhere in the night, Samuel Whitaker returned from town with the doctor, only to stop short in the doorway. He said nothing. He watched. He saw Clara Hart bent over the table, sleeves rolled, face intent, moving with a confidence born not of hope, but of training and discipline. He saw the men respond to her without question, trust written plainly in their eyes. When it was over, nearly 2 hours later, Clara stepped back, her hands trembling at last. "He'll live," she said simply. The room exhaled as one. The doctor examined Lucas carefully, his expression shifting from skepticism to open respect. "You did fine work," he said at last. "Better than fine." Clara nodded once, too tired to respond. Later, when the bunkhouse had emptied and Lucas slept under watch, Clara sat alone on the steps of her cabin, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing in particular. The night was quiet again, the storm spent. Sam approached slowly, stopping a few steps away. "You saved his life," he said. She shook her head faintly. "I did my job." "That was more than a job," he replied. "That was courage." She looked up at him then, really looked. There was pride in his eyes, yes, but something deeper too. Understanding. From that night on, no one on the Whitaker ranch questioned why Clara Hart was there. She belonged. In the days that followed, word traveled faster than Clara expected. Men from neighboring ranches came seeking her help. Families rode in quietly, hope flickering behind tired eyes. Clara treated them all, her days long and her nights shorter still. She did not notice how often Sam found reasons to pass by her cabin, or how his voice softened when he spoke to her, until one evening he stopped at her door with 2 mugs of warm cider. "I thought you might like company," he said, holding one out. "If you're not too tired." She was tired, bone-deep tired. But she nodded. They sat on the steps, watching the stars emerge one by one. No promises were made, no boundaries crossed. They spoke of small things: the weather, the land, the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent, and in the space between words, something steady took root. Not rescue, not gratitude, respect. Spring unfolded across the valley without ceremony. Snow melted into the soil, grass pushed through in patient green lines, and the ranch breathed easier with each passing day. Life settled into a rhythm that felt almost timeless, measured not by clocks, but by sunrise and sunset, by the weight of work completed and the peace that followed it. For Clara Evelyn Hart, those days were full. She moved from cabin to bunkhouse, from pasture to kitchen table, tending injuries that came with honest labor. Some were small, some were not. Each one was met with the same steady hands, the same calm voice. Men who once spoke little now lingered, asking questions that had nothing to do with medicine at all. Clara listened as carefully as she treated, understanding that care often meant more than bandages. Samuel Whitaker noticed everything, though he said little. He made sure supplies arrived without delay. He insisted the medical room stay stocked, the firewood dry, the path to Clara's cabin clear even after long days. He did not hover. He did not intrude. His presence was constant without being heavy, like the land itself. In the evenings, when the work was done and the light softened, they found themselves talking more often. Sometimes it was on the cabin steps, mugs warming their hands as the air cooled. Other times it was a quiet walk along the fence line, the sound of insects rising and falling around them. They spoke of the ranch, of the people who depended on it, of the lives they had lived before Wyoming claimed them. Sam told her about his late wife, Anna Whitaker, with a tenderness that carried no bitterness. She had loved the land, but not the solitude, he said. Illness had taken her years ago, leaving behind a quiet house and a man who learned how heavy silence could be. Clara listened, understanding grief well enough not to rush it. She told him about the charity ward in Philadelphia, about the faces she still remembered, about the way a single accusation could unravel years of work. Sam did not interrupt. He did not offer solutions. He simply believed her, and that belief mattered more than anything else he could have given. What grew between them was slow, deliberate. Not urgency, not need, choice. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills in soft gold, Sam stopped walking and turned to her. "There's something I should say," he began, his voice steady but careful. "And you don't owe me an answer tonight. or ever, if you choose. Clara waited, her heart quiet but alert. I care for you, he said. Not because you needed help, and not because you stayed. I care for you because of who you are when no one is watching. She felt the words settle, warm and solid. I care for you too, she replied. But I won't step into anything that costs me my independence. He nodded. I wouldn't want you to. They stood there for a moment longer, the wind moving gently through the grass. No kiss followed. No promise was made beyond honesty. It was enough. Weeks later, news came from town that tested that quiet certainty. A letter arrived one afternoon, delivered by a rider whose expression carried trouble before a word was spoken. Clara read it once, then again, her hands growing cold despite the warmth of the day. Dr. Edwin Crowley was coming west. He claimed to be investigating unlicensed medical practice in the territory. He had already made inquiries in Cheyenne. Clara knew the tone of his words even without hearing them spoken. He had never forgiven her. Men like Crowley did not forget humiliation. Sam found her sitting at the table, the letter folded neatly beside her. He's not welcome here, Sam said after reading it. Whatever he plans, we'll face it. Clara looked up. This isn't just about me. If he turns this into a spectacle, then we answer it properly, Sam replied. Not with fear. They decided together what would be done. Records gathered, letters requested, people informed. Clara continued her work without hesitation, her resolve firm. It was during that waiting, during that quiet tension, that Sam spoke again. They were standing near the creek, the water running clear and cold over stone. When this is over, he said, I would like to marry you. Not because I want to protect you, but because I want to walk beside you. Clara did not answer immediately. She watched the water move, thought of the bench at the station, of the firelight in the hotel room, of the night Lucas Reed lived because she trusted her own hands. Yes, she said finally, when this is over. They married the following summer, nearly 18 months after that first night in Cheyenne. The ceremony was simple, held on the porch of the main house. Ranch hands stood shoulder to shoulder with townspeople. No one whispered. No one questioned. Clara wore a dress chosen for comfort and movement. Sam wore his best suit, his hands steady when he took hers. They did not speak of rescue or debt. They spoke of partnership. As evening fell and the celebration softened into laughter and song, Clara stepped away for a moment, standing alone beneath the widening sky. Sam joined her quietly, his hand warm around hers. You all right? He asked. She smiled, looking back at the lights of the ranch, at the people who had become family. I am, she said. I truly am. The storm that had once nearly ended her life felt impossibly distant now, but the strength she had found in surviving it remained. The trouble arrived quietly, as most dangerous things do. It did not come with raised voices or flashing threats. It came folded into official language, sealed in stiff envelopes, carried by men who believed they were only doing their jobs. By the time the word spread across Cheyenne, the shape of it had already begun to form. An investigation, a hearing, questions about a woman's right to practice medicine. Clara Evelyn Hart stood at the window of her cabin when the messenger rode away, the dust of the road settling slowly behind him. She held the papers in her hands, reading them again without truly seeing the words. The air outside was bright and warm, the sound of ranch life moving on as usual. Inside her chest, something old and familiar tightened. Samuel Whitaker did not speak when he first read the notice. He folded it carefully, set it on the table, and met her eyes. "He wants to drag you back into the shadows," he said. "He wants you afraid." Clara nodded. "He always did." They did not argue about what to do next. Fear had taken enough from her already. They went to town together. The courthouse in Cheyenne was not an imposing building. It was plain, practical, built for function rather than ceremony. On the morning of the hearing, the benches filled early. Ranchers arrived in clean shirts and worn boots. Families took their places quietly. A few doctors stood near the back, hats in hand. Clara noticed them all. She also noticed Dr. Edwin Crowley as he entered, his posture stiff, his mouth curved into something that passed for a smile. He looked older than she remembered, thinner, his eyes sharper and more calculating. He did not look at her at first. When he did, it was with a confidence born of long habit. Crowley spoke smoothly when called upon. He spoke of standards and regulations, of moral conduct and professional dismissal. He framed his concern as duty, his motives as protection of the public. His words fell easily into place, practiced and precise. Clara listened without interruption. When it was her turn, she stood and spoke plainly. She did not embellish. She did not plead. She told the story as it had happened, as she had lived it. She spoke of her training, her work, her dismissal. She did not use Crowley's name when she described the assault. She did not need to. Witnesses followed. Patients spoke first, one after another, telling of injuries treated and lives steadied. Ranch hands described the night Lucas Reed nearly died, and the woman who did not hesitate when everyone else feared to act. The local doctor testified next, his respect clear as he described the care Clara provided. Letters were read aloud. Words of support from neighboring towns, from families who had traveled miles for her help, from leaders who had seen the difference her work made. Crowley's confidence began to slip. Then his own record was brought forward. Incidents he had not expected to be mentioned. Complaints quietly buried in the East. Questions about his conduct that had followed him longer than he admitted. The story he had relied upon to protect him began to unravel, thread by thread. The judge listened. He asked questions. He did not rush. When he spoke at last, his voice was calm. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, addressing Clara by the name she now carried with pride, "your service to this territory has been clear and consistent. Your training and conduct meet the standards required. You are hereby recognized as fully authorized to practice medicine within this jurisdiction." A breath Clara did not realize she had been holding finally left her chest. "As for you, Dr. Crowley," the judge continued, "this court finds no merit in your claims. Your accusations are dismissed." Crowley's mouth opened, then closed. Whatever he had planned to say found no place to land. The room did not erupt. There were no cheers, only a quiet, collective release, like tension easing after a long storm. Outside, the sun stood high and steady. Clara stepped into the light, Samuel beside her. The air felt different now, lighter, as if the past had finally loosened its grip. "It's finished," Sam said softly. "Yes," she replied. "It is." They walked back through town together, people nodding, offering small smiles. No one asked for speeches. No one demanded explanations. Respect once earned needed no announcement. That evening, as the ranch settled into its familiar rhythm, Clara stood alone for a moment, looking out over the land that had given her more than safety. It had given her truth. Samuel joined her, slipping his hand into hers. "You faced him," he said, "on your own terms." She smiled. "I didn't run this time." The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying the sound of life continuing as it always had. The past, once so loud, felt distant now. It had lost its voice. And Clara knew, with a certainty deeper than relief, that whatever lay ahead would be met not with fear, but with the strength she had reclaimed. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. For Clara Whitaker, the days after the hearing passed without ceremony. There were no celebrations planned, no speeches made. Life at the ranch resumed its steady rhythm, as if justice had simply slipped back into place where it had always belonged. That, Clara realized, was the greatest gift of all. She returned to her work with quiet focus. People still arrived at her cabin door at all hours, carrying injuries, illnesses, worries they did not know how to name. She treated them as she always had, with patience and care, never reminding anyone of what she had endured to stand where she now stood. Samuel Whitaker watched her with something deeper than pride. He saw how she moved through the world differently now. Not hardened, not bitter, but rooted, as if the land itself had accepted her fully, and she had accepted herself in return. They married in the warmth of early summer, when the grass stood tall and the valley glowed green beneath an endless sky. The ceremony was simple. No elaborate decorations, no grand display of wealth, just people. Ranch hands stood beside townsfolk. Families who had once been strangers now shared food and laughter. Clara wore a dress chosen for comfort and freedom of movement. Samuel wore a suit that fit him well enough, though he looked far more at ease without it. When they spoke their vows, there was no mention of rescue or debt or fate. They spoke of partnership, of respect, of choosing one another day after day. Life did not grow easier because of their marriage. It grew fuller. As the years passed, the Whitaker Ranch expanded steadily, not through conquest, but through care. By the early 1990s of that century, it stretched across nearly 96,000 acres, employing dozens of families year-round. Samuel took on greater responsibility beyond the ranch, lending his voice to territorial matters, advocating for roads, schools, and systems that served people who had long been overlooked. Clara's work reached even farther. What began as a single medical room grew into something larger. A small hospital opened in Cheyenne, modest at first, built not to impress but to serve. Patients came from miles away, drawn by word of mouth rather than advertisements. Clara trained others as she had once been trained, passing on not only skills, but a philosophy rooted in dignity and care. She founded a nursing school soon after, welcoming young women who were willing to travel where doctors would not go, to serve communities that had learned to survive without help. Clara taught them to trust their hands, their judgment, and their worth. Her past became part of her teaching, not as a wound, but as proof. Samuel remained her closest ally, never overshadowing her work, never claiming credit that was not his. Decisions were made together. Disagreements were met with patience rather than pride. Their home was filled with conversation, with plans scribbled on paper, with laughter that carried late into the night. They were blessed with 2 children, a son and a daughter, who grew up running across open fields and listening to stories told by lantern light. They learned early that strength did not always look the way people expected it to look. That kindness could be firm. That courage could be quiet. Years later, when visitors came to Cheyenne, they often asked to see the museum. Inside, behind glass worn smooth by time, rested a small leather medical bag. Its strap was cracked, its corners rounded. A simple plaque beneath it explained that the bag had belonged to a nurse who arrived in the territory, with nothing but her training and her resolve. Nearby lay a plain gold wedding ring, no jewels, no inscription visible to the eye. Visitors lingered there longer than they meant to. They asked guides about the blizzard, about the hearing, about how one woman's refusal to be silenced had reshaped more than her own life. The guides told the story gently, without embellishment, because the truth was enough. Clara and Samuel lived long enough to see the territory become a state, to watch towns grow where empty land had once stretched unbroken. When Samuel passed in the winter of 1926, Clara sat by his side, her hand resting in his, the way it had on so many evenings before. She followed him months later, quietly, without fanfare. They were buried together on a hill overlooking the land they had built not through force, but through care. Two stones stood side by side beneath the wide Wyoming sky. The words carved into them were simple: forever and always. Even now, when the wind moves through the cottonwoods and the grass bends in slow waves, people say you can feel something there. Not sorrow, not loss, peace. The kind that comes from knowing a life was lived fully, from knowing that survival was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something enduring. And it all began, as so many things do, with one choice made on a bitter night. One person who stopped. One hand offered without conditions. That is what remains, long after the storm is gone.